Evening, everyone. I'm going to go ahead in the spirit of starting on time, trying to start us. The house clock is a few minutes fast, just so you know that. I'm Denise Vigna with Howard Center, and welcome to this Myrna and Stephen Wise Tulin Fall Education Session on Habits with Dr. Sandy Steingard. We're really tickled to have you all here. So a couple of just housekeeping items. Hello, Whit. A couple of housekeeping items. There is water on the front table here by Bill. Bill, will you just raise your hand there for a moment? Thank you. Restrooms are off the alcove, and we have someone out there who can help you make your way to them if you need to. Anyone who needs to leave early, please feel free. I know there are a few of you who are going out to the Flynn and to some other shows this evening, so please feel free to come and go as you need to. The format for this evening is going to be Dr. Steingard giving us about an hour presentation, and then there'll be some Q&A time. And during that time, we are going to bring, or I will bring around a microphone. It'll be very important so that everyone in the audience hears your question or your comment. And it's also really important for VCAM, who is one of our sponsors and will be filming tonight. I want to just introduce Joey behind the screen, Bill here near the water, and Samuel is up in the center, so thanks to them. The video will be on our website within about 2 to 3 weeks typically, so you can check back or send me an email. My information's in the folder. So a couple of other just announcements. Please take a look at the Family Advisory Council. We have some upcoming meetings. The November 15th, of course, is over, but in January, March, and May, we invite any family members who are receiving or have received children's services to join us. Please complete your feedback form. It's in your folder. Even if you have to leave early, we really appreciate the feedback, and we absolutely pay attention to your requests for other topics or presenters. We'll return here in the spring in March, and we'll email you all in advance if you've provided email addresses for us. We'll work to really end promptly at 7:30, and I want to just say thank you to Blue Cross Blue Shield. They're our presenting sponsor, to our host, Dealer.com. Many of you have commented on the amazing building. There's a tennis court inside and a cafe down at the north end. And then, of course, our friends at VCAM. So it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, and I say one of my favorite Howard Center people, Dr. Sandra Steingard. She's our Chief Medical Officer. She's been with Howard Center for over 2 decades. She's also a Clinical Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Vermont Lerner College of Medicine. For over 20 years, her clinical practice has primarily included patients with schizophrenia and other psychotic illnesses. She works very, very hard. She's kind. She's compassionate. She serves on the board of the Foundation for Excellence in Mental Health Care, NAMI Vermont, and the Mad in America Continuing Education Fund. She speaks internationally and writes a blog called Anatomy of a Psychiatrist. And you can find that on the website, madinamerica.com, and often we will link to it in our Facebook posts. So, without further ado, Dr. Steingard, please come to the podium.
Thank you. So, let's see, I'll go to the next slide. You'll see this rather grandiose title, Understanding Habits to Change Ourselves and Change the World. Before I start, I'm going to start with a mindfulness moment. I'm going to talk a little bit about mindfulness as I get into offering some suggestions for changing habits. So I'm going to have everybody to the level to which you're comfortable. Sit in your seat, take a moment to just kind of feel yourself centered, and take a deep breath, and on the exhale, try to think about letting go of some of the stresses of the day, and then take another breath, and on the exhale, bring to mind some appreciation, some feeling of gratitude. And my feeling of gratitude is that I'm honored by your presence. I'm sure there's a lot of other things to do. For those of you going to theater, I could shift into song later on if you're feeling really torn. But still, it means a lot to me. And the idea of starting this way is to just become more present, and the idea of focusing on a moment of gratitude is to put you in a state of mind where you're more open and able to just take in what we're going to talk about. I hope that this is interesting and entertaining to you. So my hopes, learning objectives, is that by the end of the talk, you will have a basic understanding of the cognitive processes that influence decision-making, understand habit formation, understand how habits help us to function, how new habits are created, appreciate the value of self-compassion, social connection, and then I'm going to give some suggestions of tools to develop a plan to create a new habit. And we're actually going to spend some time and have people think about something that they might want to develop as a new habit and go through this template that we have in the folders that you gave today. So this talk is about change, and I'm in it in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm nervous because I often talk about areas where I do feel like I'm an expert. Like you heard about my interest in psychosis. That's what I do for a living. And this area, really, I'm a student. And I have a lot of the books that I've read up there, and I really want to make sure that I give credit to the people that have influenced me. And it's going to be personal because I'm going to talk about some of the changes, some of the habits that I have personally tried to develop, and it's an ongoing thing. And so it's difficult, but I have reasons for doing that. So I'm going to talk about some of the changes and why this topic has become important to me, both professionally and personally. So professionally, I have decided that it's important and helpful as a doctor, especially a psychiatrist, to shift away from a pathologizing stance and more towards the idea of shared humanity. And what I mean by that is that as a psychiatrist in my training, well, doctors are taught to identify pathology, and there's good reasons for that, right? If you have some problem with your esophagus, you know, it's good to have a doctor that might be able to identify that and teach you about it. But there's other problems of living that maybe don't fit that way. And so psychiatry has these labels. You know, you heard the label schizophrenia or the label bipolar disorder. And so the field evolved in this way to sort of identify the thing that's wrong in a person, and then the idea is the expert's going to fix them. And I think that it's helpful in a lot of ways to just think about being a human being and the challenges of being a human being, because it allows us to sit together, you know, to understand that there's connections. And this is in no way meant to diminish the struggling that people have, because sometimes people feel that might be trivializing it. Well, you know, we all get sad, but then there's some people that are really, really struggling with a depth of unhappiness that seems different. But the problem is that I think the illness model does have hazards. I think it was promoted heavily initially with the good intention of countering what I think wasn't a medical question, but a moral question, because there was a notion that these problems weren't real or it's their fault. And I think the idea promoted a lot in the 70s, particularly the 80s, of sort of the broken brain was to say people can't help it. It's an illness like any other illness. You'll hear this language all the time. And I understand that, and I think I'm not in favor of moralizing these problems at all. But I think what it does, the downside is that it can create the sense that one is a passive victim of this thing that's happened, and that all you can do is wait for someone outside of you to fix you. And what I'm going to talk about today that I think for a lot of people and a lot of the things that we encounter, that although there may be some external fixes, there are also really important things that people can do or work to do to, that will be helpful. And that what you want to do is to try to engender, it's hard, and you want to try to join with and engender the energy, the mental and physical energy that it sometimes takes. And so for me, talking about habits of mind, habits of behavior, is a way to join with people. And in doing that, I'm going to talk about some reason why I think this is true, to help give people the energy to make these changes. So I'm also going to talk in a personal way. So that's me. Both of them are me. And I have struggled my whole life with my relationship to food. And in the past couple of years, I've been able to make some changes. It's an ongoing process. And as part of this idea about habits, and also my whole, of sort of the shift professionally is also a recognition of the power of a person with lived experience to be helpful in a lot of ways. That being able to, it's this whole thing of sitting beside as opposed to sitting opposite. That sitting beside someone and sharing your humanity can be a healing thing. It can be helpful for the person doing it, and it can be helpful for the person that you're sitting with. So that in that way, I am helping myself by offering myself and offering my own struggle, but also to connect in a way as a human being and not be here as an expert, to be here as another human being that struggles in certain ways, and to share with you the ways in which I've tried to adapt certain practices to, to change my life. And I also think it can, I know for me, I would, I don't know that I'm always going to be the person in the orange T-shirt. That's what's embarrassing and risky about this, because if you come to the talk, there are people here. There's a diverse section of people here, from my colleagues at work to people I don't know to people who taught my children in school. It's lovely. But you could come back in a year, and if you know me, this is an ongoing process, and I could be in a very different space, and it's public and you see it, but that's what it is, and that's what the lesson is. You don't get to a destination and then it's done. It's an ongoing process of trying to figure out how do you live your life. And I know that I would look at people that looked very fit and just think they are fundamentally different from me. I used to joke, my husband went to a personal trainer for a while, and I said, I would break them. I would break that trainer because I don't ever want to exercise. And that was my self-identity. And, what I've learned is that, you can shift your self-identity with some work. And that's what I want to talk about today, is what the nature of the work is. So, what I say here is, how do you change a lifelong habit? And why is it hard to do what you want to do? Because I got to say, because I've been interested in food my whole life, I think I've been fairly expert, and it's not only personally, but I work with a lot of people who struggle in this area, and so I'm always trying to, I give people drugs that cause them to gain weight, for instance. People are eating very unhealthy diets. I've been very interested in food and food systems for many, many years. And yet here I was not able to adapt the things that I knew that I wanted to do, that I aspired to do, that, fit with my values. And what is that about? It's not, it goes beyond sort of kind of the intellectual strength. So the answer that I've come to, an answer I should have put on that slide. I'm trying to because I want to present this with humility, is that, learning about the brain and psychological processes can help, but it doesn't, for me, it didn't really impact behavior. I knew a lot about this stuff. I could give you a lot of ideas about what the psychological roots to my, lifelong overeating was, but it didn't really change. And so I think you need a strategy what helped me was a strategy, a particular strategy combined with social connection. And in developing new habits and accepting that the old habits are always going to be there. And having self-compassion, developing self-compassion, working on self-compassion as a way to accept, what is. And really, my argument is I think anyone can do this, but I think this is hard and it takes practice. So you need to kind of figure out a way to surround yourself with these supports to have the energy. And I'm going to explain more about this. So I'm going to start by talking about cognitive psychology. So I put on, I told you, I'm going to start talking about these books, starting with the one on my right and your left. Daniel Kahneman is a cognitive psychologist who won a Nobel Prize in economics. And I think it's really interesting that these cognitive psychologists, and there's another book there called Nudge, and one of the authors is Richard Thaler, who just won a Nobel Prize this year in behavioral in economics. And I think it's really interesting that these cognitive psychologists have won their Nobels in economics because the best cognitive psychologists in the world are in advertising. I mean, we are getting played all the time. They're very, very good at it. I mean, if one of those books about habit formation, they talk about how toothpaste was sold, what was done to create in us the habit of brushing our teeth every day. And it wasn't a dentist telling you this is better for you. It's that intellectual knowledge didn't really change it. It was something else. So I want to start with talking about cognitive psychology because I hope I make this clear. To me, this helps to understand all this. And I think having some understanding can help sort of motivate you. So the brain's a remarkable organ, and I am coming from these ideas of thinking that thought and feelings do emanate from the brain, and the brain takes up a lot of energy. A lot of the energy that we burn every day is going to keeping this brain working. So it makes sense that any kind of process that conserves energy, literally conserves energy, would have an evolutionary advantage. So the brain seems to be created in a way to come up with shortcuts. And what Kahneman talks about are two ways of thinking. And because he's a cognitive psychologist, the whole book's written to sort of get you to understand it. And what he says is he talks about system 1 and system 2. There aren't really two systems. It's a construct, but there are different kinds of thinking, and I'm going to demonstrate this to you in a minute. So what he calls system 1 is sort of like the automatic, fast, effortless kind of thinking, which we are using all the time. It's our preferred mode. And system 2 takes some effort. You need to stop and so if I say what's 2 times 2, an answer comes to mind. Most of you don't really spend much effort. I say, what's 456 times 267? And I say, think about this mentally. You're going to be using system 2. It's a much harder problem. What Kahneman talks about are biases he calls heuristics. He had a partner, Amos Tversky, they're Israeli psychologist, and just did this really creative, fun, brilliant work. And The Money Project is written by Michael Lewis. It's a New York Times bestseller, and he talks a lot about their partnership and what they did. It's an entertaining book, but I'm very, very I just adore Daniel Kahneman's book, so I highly recommend reading that. But anyway, so they talk about these heuristics, so rules of thumb, things that you come to. So a common one is the availability heuristic. If something just happened recently, you just were driving to work and someone stopped short in front of you, you're going to be really nervous about drivers in front of you and even other things around it. It's going to be because that's what comes to mind first. So that's going to shift up into the system 1 thinking for a while because it's going to be so available to you. Now, the problem is that the system works really, really well. It's amazing what we can do every day until it doesn't work. So I'm going to show some slides, and then we're going to talk about them. So I just want you to think in your mind which line is longer. Okay, you could say one on the top or bottom are they same, okay? Okay, now I'm going to give you two problems, and you can take a minute and think about this. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Keep quiet if you know this, and just quickly say what you think the answer is. Put it in your mind, write it down on a piece of paper. Okay? The next one is a syllogism. Took me a while to learn that word, but anyway. All roses are flowers. Some flowers fade quickly. Therefore, some roses fade quickly. Think about it quickly. True or false? Okay? Mark your answer. So, because I'm a kind person, I'm not going to ask you what to say. But anybody want to venture a guess? I mean, these are the answers. That most people, I'm guessing most people in the room, the first thought that came to mind is 10 cents. But if the ball costs 10 cents and the bat is $1 more, the bat would be $1.10, and then it would be $1.20. The ball costs 5 cents. The bat costs $1.05, okay? And that's $1.10. And the syllogism is wrong. Just because all roses are flowers doesn't mean that they fall into that subsector of flowers that fade quickly. But most people will say it's true. Now, lest you're feeling badly about yourself, because I'm all about compassion and positive psychology, this is not, intelligence has something to do with it, but not nearly as much as you think. Because this is how our brains are wired. This is how we are, and it's a good thing. If you had to think, if any of you have had the experience of being in a car with someone who's learning to drive and you've survived, it's a very scary experience. Driving a car is like unbelievable. You just think about it, it's unbelievable. And yet when you drive for a lot, you get so confident you think you can text and drive. Not a good idea, but you think that because it's so automatic. A lot of us will sort of be thinking about something else, but we do amazing things, but this is the work of these cognitive psychologists. More than 50% of Harvard, MIT, and Princeton students answer the ball question incorrectly. I think that's remarkable. And a majority of college students endorse the rose syllogism, and the line on top, it looks longer. I'm sorry, it looks longer. And I have to say, I'm not the best at PowerPoint, so I'm not going to take it to the bank that they're the same, but I'm telling you, they're pretty much the same. And when they really are the same and you give it to people, your eyes and your brain tell you it's longer. We make mistakes all the time. That's just the way we are. So this is, I don't expect you to read the slide, but it sort of brings up, Firstly, in Kahneman were doing their work in the 70s and 80s, and it's become a huge field. As I said, this isn't my area of expertise. But I found this slide, and it's like, all the cognitive biases that have been identified. So just to show you, these are all the ways at which we're biased and tend to make incorrect decisions. And so this is, it's a helpful thing to know. So what does this have to do with habits? Well, habits are a way of surviving. Habits are the automatic thing. They're the automatic ways of working. If you get up in the morning, think about everything you do from the time you wake up till you walk out the door. It's like a huge amount of stuff, and most of it is automatic. Most of it, you just do it because you do it every day. You're not spending a lot of energy. And that's that system one. We need the system one. We need it. It's part of us. And we are creatures of habit. This is how we're living your life. If you have a habit that you don't like, give yourself a break. You're a human being. And that's an important part of habit change, I think. This self-compassion, to understand it's hard. We would not function if we did not have the ability to create these habits of mind and behavior. So, I said, think about brushing your teeth, preparing our food, driving a car. For many of us, it doesn't take much effort because they're on this System 1 level. So now I'm going to shift to talking about habit formation, and that shifts to, so I've now gone through the first 3 books. Nudge is the 3rd book there, and it's like a popular book that talks a lot about this whole cognitive psychology thing. Again, Kahneman's my favorite, but people like different things, and if you're curious about this, those are books. But the next book is this book by Charles Duhigg, who's a journalist, and he wrote this New York Times bestseller, and I figured, well, if I'm going to do a book on habits, I should read his book. And it's interesting. It's very easy to get through. It's pretty light. And he basically talked to a lot of researchers and wrote this book. So he talks about these studies done. I think these were done at MIT with mice, and they created a maze. The mouse is behind that line and that barrier, and when the barrier opens, there's a click. So the mouse hears the click, and then the mouse goes down to the end of the T and eventually finds the chocolate. But when they first do it, the first few times, the mouse meanders, kind of walks around, sniffs around, might go to one end and then finds the chocolate. But over time, the click goes down, turns left, gets the chocolate. So they look at brain activity, from the beginning to the end. And this is what they find. At the top, it's the beginning time, and you see like a lot of brain activity at every single step. Because everything's hard. Everything is like new. Everything is novel. And at the end of the week, there's a click, so there's a lot of energy there. Then it lowers down, and then it goes up again at the point of getting the chocolate. And that's what we do. That's what happens to us as we learn a new habit. So these people from MIT describe what they call the habit loop. And so there's a click, a routine, and a reward. And those are the components that get this thing set up. I want to take a minute, as like a mini break in this talk, to talk about definitions, because I think there's a lot of confusion. And so, someone might ask a question. I'm going to talk about habit, addiction, compulsion, obsession, addiction. Like, are these the same? Are they different? I'm going to talk later about this food program I've been on, and the guru of this really talks about food addiction. And I don't know, maybe it's a stigmatizing thing for me. Like, I'm more comfortable talking about habits, but I think there's an overlap. And I just want to define these terms. So habit is a behavioral thought that is completed without expending much mental effort, but not doing it is not always associated with distress. This is embarrassing to say, but a few weeks ago I realized I'm at work and I forgot to brush my teeth. Now, I do brush my teeth in the morning. But, I have this, routine, and it's like I turn on the shower and wait for the water to get warm, and I brush my teeth, and I've learned that that's the amount of time it takes. But for some reason, I did something different, and that, threw me off, That was it, So it doesn't happen every day, but, it was an embarrassing thing. It wasn't like I was in a lot of distress. I was a little mortified and embarrassed later on, but, So that's a habit, it's just, Now, an obsessional thought is an intrusive, unwanted thought that a person can't stop. And I say that because I think that if you have something, and this comes from cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy, that they approach certain, what I would call habits of mind. Like if someone is unhappy, a depressed person, that person may sort of constantly be thinking, I'm a failure, or I'm no good at this, or I can't do this. And in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and cognitive therapy, that becomes something that is is approached as a habit of mind. And then some of these approaches are offered to try to shift, to develop a different kind of thought, a different thought about oneself, and to shift that. So I think that's why I wanted to talk about obsessional thoughts, because I think, again, obsessional thoughts kind of blur in or might be somewhat similar to what I would call a habit of mind. I think it just may be a different way to do it, and there may be degrees to which there might be times where the thought is so kind of anomalous that one might talk about as an obsessional thought. Now, compulsion is an overwhelming urge to do something that the person doesn't want to do. These can be benign acts, but avoiding it is associated with a lot of distress. So classic compulsion, hand-washing compulsion. And the person, has to wash their hands to a point where, like, their hands could get chapped. Now, and then I'm going to come back to sort of saying how I think about these different categories. So I want to talk about an addiction. So an addiction is an inability to stop an unwanted behavior. The behaviors are considered helpful when you talk about addiction. It often has a physiologic component, particularly when you talk about drugs. The person gets withdrawal when they stop it, and abstinence is highly distressful. Now, my experience in life, working as a psychiatrist and just reflecting on my own self is like, I don't think there are clear lines between these things. I think sometimes the distinctions are helpful, but I think they blur into one another. So some people will talk about like gambling addictions and shopping addictions, and they're talking about the fact that the person doesn't want to do it. It could be causing a lot of troubles in the person's life, and there's some evidence that it's the same kind of feedback loop that's warranted. But you could talk about it as like a bad habit. I mean, I don't think it's that important and sometimes to make these distinctions, but I wanted to offer these definitions to you in case you were curious. So I'm going to spend the next few slides talking about the neuroscience of habit and addiction. And I have like a funny relationship to this whole idea of neuroscience because I think like a lot of things that I'm going to talk about, like what I think can be helpful to people, you don't need to know what's happening in the brain. And I have this, it sort of bugs me because right now we live in a world, like the National Institute of Mental Health is like, the brain is like the hierarchy. Like if you find something wrong in the brain, then it's true. Like it's holding a kind of epistemic authority in the world that I think is unwarranted because the problem is, I'm going to get onto like my political, I told Denise I behaved tonight, but I have a bad habit, Denise. A lot of resources go to understanding this when, for instance, I would like the resource to have a coach that comes in and works with the people that I work with to teach them how to cook and buy food, but that's not like as sexy as finding, where in the brain gets triggered when people, eat salt and fat and sugar. So, but I want to influence you. I want to have influence, and I think because I want you, I want you to feel armed. I want you to feel energized if there's some habit that you want to develop. And I've come to realize that for a lot of people, knowing some neuroscience does that for them because of where we are in the world. It just seems like truth, and it gives people that energy. So here we go. So there's been a lot of work done in this area, and scientists have identified this reward center in the brain, a reward circuitry. And the area is activated by highly pleasurable things. Addictive drugs activate the center, but so do certain foods. Like one of the books up there by David Kessler, who's a former commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, maybe one of the last honest ones there, but who knows. Anyway, I guess he's had his own issues with food, and after he retired, he did all this research and kind of collected the data, and he talks about salt, sugar, and fat triggering the brain the way cocaine does, the way opiates do, and how, what happened in our country with industrial agriculture is they are really, really good. We are really good at making food, but there's like a point. If you're in business, you need to keep like making more money every year, right? Being flatline isn't like successful for your shareholders. So what do you do when you've made like enough food for people, but you're making more? Well, what you do is you put food into packages to induce people to eat more food, and that's what's happened in the food systems of the country. That's what Michael Pollan has talked about, and that's what David Kessler's talked about. Anybody here who it's like you can't eat one potato chip. It's a big joke, but it's true. You can't. Because it triggers that part of the brain. It's really, really hard to walk away from. And if Michael Pollan says shop on the outside of the grocery store. you know, because everything in the middle, like other than like the toilet paper, which presumably you're not eating, you don't need to be a healthy person. What you need are the fruits and vegetables and a little bit of protein. That's what you need to keep your body going. But, you know, it's all in there. So this is what's happening to us. You know, the action of the reward center, the ways drugs impact, is what people are talking about when they talk about the disease of addiction. It's an illness like any others. And this is controversial, but I think I get that notion because we do want to destigmatize this. I mean, I work for an agency that's one of the largest, offers the most treatment for people with substance abuse disorders. And this is important work, and I'm very proud of the work we do. But I think that a lot of that language is to try to destigmatize it, and it's not so much that the brain is diseased, it's the brain has been sort of hijacked. The brain is doing what the brain does and has been hijacked. Now, maybe this is semantics, but the reason why I think it's important is that we don't want to rob people of their agency. We want to be kind to people. We want to be compassionate that they've gotten caught in this loop. It's what happens to you if you're exposed and vulnerable in a lot of ways, but we also don't want to rob people of their agency because they're going to need that to get better, to change their lives. So, repeated actions will create these pathways, and then our lazy brain will follow those pathways. And now, new habits, when you develop a new habit, you're basically creating a new pathway. And one of the disappointing facts of the brain is that the belief is that the old pathways never really go away. So, I think about this as a metaphor that's personally been helpful. Like, you think of a mountain that has a stream, right? The snow melts in the spring, and the water has found a way, and it's a stream or a river, right? And then, a tree falls down in the path, and so it can't go there, and so another stream's created. And then maybe over time, that becomes a big stream. But if some students are hired to work in the mountains over the summer and they chop down that tree, then over time the new stream comes back. And this is kind of this idea of the pathways. So that for me has been helpful because it's part of this self-compassion. I have some bad food habits, and so even though I've been able to make changes, I'm well aware that I'm still me, and I need to be careful. And that can be really, really demoralizing. And so the idea of saying, look, I'm a human being. I want to feel special, but, I'm a human being, and that's part of what it is. And just to sort of hunker down and continue to do the things that seem to be helpful to keep going on the path that I would prefer to be on, And so that's... So I think I've said this, and I think it's helpful to know people about this because we want to try to reduce the sense of shame for individuals, for their families. We want to promote agency. And I think that when people are led to believe they're just passive victims of a brain disease, it might hinder their ability to change. So I think there's two messages. Yes, your brain is involved and it's been altered. And yes, you have the ability to create new patterns. So not so much, one or the other, but, a both and kind of idea. So now I'm going to talk about food, my favorite topic. I mean, I think when people talk about habits, I don't think I'm that. That's why one reason why I'm talking about this is that it's pretty common. And so, this is, and because of our culture and food system, and so it's a common kind of thing to talk about. So, and it's one of the things that I'm really interested in. So as I said the best cognitive psychologists are in advertising. I mean, they're brilliant, and this is what advertising is. That's what advertising is. It's not a bad thing. This food thing that I got into, I was the target of an advertisement that was incredibly effective. And fortunately, I think it was good. But I remember at the time, these videos popped up somewhere, and because I'm always interested in this, I start watching them, and I could feel it working on me and feeling like I'm getting worked on. I know so much about it that it seemed to have some legitimacy to me. It didn't seem like some charlatan kind of thing, and so that led me to sort of make a decision to dive in. But I remember that feeling. It was like a weird kind of feeling. Now, we are all subject to powerful cues to eat food that our bodies don't need. It's all the time. I mean, yeah, and I've talked about sugar, salt, and fat, and one idea that, and this is the last book, Susan Pierce Thompson, and I definitely want to give credit to all these people, and that's the program that I've been following. It's a business. I think she has a very good product. I'm not here, I've talked to someone about this, like, I'm not here to be an expert. I'm not here to promote something, although if you're interested, this is a book, and it's available, and you can look at it, and, you can take what I've said, not to say you should do this, but to say, you're all smart, independent people, and you can make your own decision. I'm just sharing with you my experience. And one of the things that Dr. Thompson talks about is the vulnerability, that certain people may be particularly vulnerable, and this particular program would be people with like a high susceptibility to eating foods in kind of an addictive or excessively habitual way, whatever language you want to use. It may not be that useful for people who kind of eat and feel full and walk away. I mean, I'm not one of those people. And so, and so this has been really, really helpful. I'm just someone who does not have, whatever, for 60 years of, kind of a very complicated, funny relationship with food. Being full isn't enough for me. I mean, it's embarrassing, but it's true. And I know I'm not the only one, so I'm sharing this. So it's interesting because there's so much out there about diet. This food, that food. I mean, honestly, it's really, really simple. Fruits and vegetables, like the one plate rule. Your plate should be 2/3 fruit and vegetables. For an added benefit, make them colorful, because the colors in food comes from the micronutrients. So if it's colorful, you're getting a variety. And you want a little bit of protein, and you can sort of choose there. Personally, I'm in favor of local proteins, if you can, if you eat meat and other stuff, but you want some protein. That's really what it is. And losing weight is basically pretty simple. Our body needs a certain amount of energy. We tend to measure that in calories. And if you take in more energy than your body needs, it's going to store it as fat. If you take in less, over time, you're going to release that. It goes into the atmosphere. And that's, I mean, you can go and, read all sorts of things, but in the end, honestly, this is really what it comes down to. The problem is that, like, for me, I knew that, but I could not necessarily translate it into day in, day out, kinds of stuff. And I think it does, and this is the work of Dr. Thompson, that we're, and others, that we're so habituated that it's just not enough to have the intellectual power. Just like, someone could tell me those two lines are the same, and I'm going to look at them and they're going to be different. It's just, they're always going to, that top line's always going to look bigger. So again, I want to give credit where this is due, and so the program's called Bright Line Eating, and it treats food as an addiction. And the problem is, like, if you have an addiction to cocaine, you're going to start by getting away from cocaine and then trying to organize your life to not be around the triggers, the cues, the cues, the pattern, and reward. But you can't do that with food because food is all around us. So it's called Bright Lines because she recommends these rules. And the rules become, sort of the protection. So eating certain foods, eating certain times, and there's control over the food, weighing and measuring what you eat so you get some containment on the quantity. But what's been very, very interesting to me about her project, and it's part of the Duhigg thing, but it's really, really emphasized, is the power of social connection, using positive psychology and self-compassion. And I think through my own experience and sort of general reading, I think that's really important, because I think that's what can give you the energy to overcome the tendency to shift back into the easier thing. And there's a lot of data, not just here, but in general, on the power of social connection. And it really comes back to the whole thing about lived experience, being able to connect. And, you know, Dr. Thompson is someone who struggles with this herself and has put it out there. And I think that is part of what's inspired me. And that's so powerful and compelling. And in my work, you know, there's someone here who works for this, a team, our START team, and there's people who work at Westview, which is our social clubhouse. And I think the work that they're doing as people who are willing and able to share their own experiences is so powerful and important. And it's what it can give people that energy to sort of make the shift that they're choosing to change. So I think that's I think a really critical. And again, there's a lot in this of pattern formation. You know, preparing one's food in advance, writing down one's food, making a commitment. This is what I'm going to eat because. Yesterday, I can talk about my boss because he was giving me a hard time, as he's wont to do. I know this is going to be recorded. It's okay. I'm close to retirement. So there was a kind of open house. And, you know, what happens in the world is a lot of social events are tied to food. You know, we're coming up with a big food holiday next week, right? And so, you know, people that, you know, and you're trained this way. There's nothing really bad about it. You're trained to connect food to pleasure, food to social connections. So it worked a lot, and there was like an open house thing, and so there was a lot of like stuff around. And first of all, because I've told him about this, I said I try to not eat I eat 3 meals a day. That's part of the rules, and it's freeing in a way. I really enjoy food way better than I ever did because I commit to food, I eat a certain amount of food, and then the rest of the time it's like I'm done. But it was like 1 PM, I was having a busy day, I didn't really have time to do my thing, and I'm there eating it was fruit, and it was like, oh, I thought you don't eat between meals. So it's like kind of like, you know, my response is F you, you know, because I don't like people challenging me. But the thing is, and this is a funny story, this is partly why I'm the way I am. I have, my grandparents were these Eastern European immigrants, and food was like critical. Like my mother, her mother would say, you know, she would have a piece of challah, it's Jewish food, you know, before she goes to bed so she won't get hungry during the night, you know. And then the other grandmother, I'd go to her house and she'd say, you know, are you hungry? You want a piece of fruit? You know, no, Bubby, that's what I call it. No, Bubby, I'm not hungry. You have to be hungry to eat a piece of fruit? So when Bob is saying to me, you know, like, I mean, it's like, it's fruit, Bob, you know. But then he's at the popcorn stand, and it was like, it's a cultural thing. But anyway, he like wants me to take, I don't want a bag of popcorn. Take the bag of popcorn, Bob. I mean, seriously, we're like going back and forth. It's like, I don't want the frickin' popcorn. But, you know, it's hard. You know, if you're someone like, you know, like you can say, oh, well, today is a special occasion, so I'm going to have this now. Like, honestly, what I've learned, like, there's like special occasions, like every day. You know, going to filling my car up with gas and going in and paying, it's a special occasion. I'm going to get some candy, you know. It's like not everyone is vulnerable to that, but a lot of us are, and that's what's happening. It's this like habitual thing. Like I really can't go into a movie theater without wanting candy, and I don't even, like candy's not my thing, but it's like from being a little kid and going to the movies, that's what we did. It's like movies, candy, you know, it's just a funny thing. So, click. The candy is yeah, it's the click. Though the movie's the click and the candy's the reward, you know. So anyway, so this is, I'm just sharing with you a little bit about this, and there is a book and online, and why, you know, I think it's helpful. The thing that I want to say, and I sort of had this epiphany today, is that, you know, it's not like you get to a place, and so a lot of us who get into like a diet mentality think, oh, the goal is to get to your goal weight. And I've gotten to my goal weight, and then I've like said goodbye to my goal weight. And because if you're in that mentality, it's like you're running a race, and when you get to the end of the race, you're done. And really, with habit formation, it's every day. It's one day at a time. And it's one day at a time. And that's disappointing. I wish it was different, but at least in my experience and my reading about it, it's adapting a way, a kind of, you know, the patterns, the self-compassion, and kind of the humility to say, every day I'm going to try my best. And some days I'm not going to do great, but then I'm going to just pick up and resume and go on. And again, this comes a lot from Dr. Thompson. So now we're going to get to, we're good for time, yeah. The developing a new habit. So the idea is to create this automaticity, something, but it's going to start at system 2. It's going to start as effortful, and that's where you need the social connection, you need that, and you want to get it as much as possible into system 1. And it takes some effort, and failure is not a proof of the failure of the concept. Failure is proof that you're a human being. And that's the thing. People get into the WTF, concept, like you're doing something and then you let go and it's like, forget it, I'm not that person. No, you can be that person. You can be that person. It's like, yeah, it's going to be harder. Like right now, my big habit is to try to become someone who exercises every day. And it's it's hard. And it started out because where's my guru is here, Kathy. Yeah, so, Kathy Viscaglia, a colleague who, I really admire a lot and I know is really into fitness, but really, I would say we're like different species. I admire her. I wish I was that way, but, And so, anyway, I started to try to get into exercise, and she convinced me to try to do a triathlon, sprint triathlon. I came in 8th from last. But anyway, I finished it. It was great. And the thing is, the initial, that's a big accomplishment. But the thing is, the initial motivation was I've learned that I have incredible fear of public humiliation. So, that was, the thing. All summer, it's oh, I'm going to go home and I'm going to do this stuff because, the idea of, being there and having to be scooped out of the lake or something was so mortifying to me that it motivated me. But then, see, this is a tricky thing. That's like a diet, right? So I knew that I was vulnerable the day after to say, okay, I'm done. And so really what the real thing was is I wanted that to jumpstart to have a pattern of exercise. So, this is this thing, writing it down, tracking it, trying to make commitments, having social connection. And Kathy, thank you, you're wonderful in many ways, but is like I talked to her a lot about this, probably annoyed at me, because that's part of my working. If I say it enough, maybe that will be who I am, because it's still, I still notice this little thing that, I have to get over to actually do it. There's a lot of reward doing it, but that is hard. So it's a process. And, so this is the idea. Develop these supports and be kind to yourself. So Duhigg, in his book at the end, he talks about, everybody says, he talks about breaking a bad habit. I like to frame it in creating a new habit. It's just part of that positive psychology. So he talks about identifying a routine, experimenting rewards, remember that circuitry, isolate the cue, and then having a plan. And in the book, he talks about the fact that he was getting a cookie every day in the middle of the afternoon. And he had put on 8 pounds, and his wife was making comments, so he decided he wanted to give up the cookie habit. So the first thing was to identify the routine. The routine was he would go to the cafeteria, buy a cookie, and talk with friends. So he tried at first to experiment with different rewards, like go for a walk, go talk to friends, buy a different kind of snack. He was trying to isolate what was the thing. Was it a break? Was it the social connection? Was he hungry? And then when he'd come back to his desk, he would write down a word or two of what had happened with these different things. And then he would set a timer for 15 minutes. And at the end of the timer, he still wanted the cookie. He would see which of these different things helped him. So if he went for a walk, came back, set the timer, and at the end he still wanted the cookie, then the walk wasn't the thing. And so what he found was talking to friends seemed to be the most effective thing at reducing the cravings. So then he tried to isolate the cue, and he said most cues are location, time, emotional state, other people, and an immediately preceding action. So what he started to do is every day for a while write down where he was, the time, emotional state. And when he did it over time, he saw one thing stood out as a pattern that was the same. Everything else varied, and that was the time of day. It was about 3:30 in the afternoon. So he created a plan based on that. He identified the routine that every day, often around 3:30, he would get up, go to the cafeteria, get the cookie. And what he decided to do is he would set a timer That became his new cue. He set it for 3 or 3:30, and at that time what he would do is get up and go and have a conversation with a colleague. And then he would come back to his desk. And so over time, that became his new habit. And he said after a while he didn't need to set the timer. So that's an example of what he did and how he actualized this. Now, I have kind of a sort of more like integrating a lot of these other ideas to pick a thing. And just pick one thing and make it not so hard. You know, if you want to do this, because you want the positive, you want a reward, and one reward is being successful. Create a plan, and you could pull from what Duhigg has talked about, write it down, and find a friend. Find a friend that you might commit to, that you can talk to, or you might want to come and like give you, like not like my boss who says you're not supposed to be eating in the middle of the afternoon. I love the guy. I love the guy. Thank you. I'm grateful to be his employee. We just have that kind of relationship. What can I say? And I think, like in another life, he was my big brother. And so, right, find a friend, have a daily plan. So, like, you know, every day, whatever you're doing, this is my plan for the day. These kind of commitments help you. That's what boosts up the energy. And I start out with a little mindfulness exercise because some mindfulness, and I'm going to talk a little bit more, that can help you to sort of separate from the urge and to sort of regard it as opposed to a thing, as opposed to who you are. So hunger, if you have some hunger, you try to like step away and notice the hunger. Dr. Pearson will say, oh, you know, think of your hunger as like this cute little fuzzy animal. And I remember the first time thinking, what? You know, but it's like, okay, I'm noticing as opposed to like immediately needing food, because that's sort of how I was. I was like rarely was hungry. These are my mindfulness chimes. I put them on, so take a deep breath. Okay. I think gratitude is really a helpful part of a plan, and to forgive yourself when you're full. So I have this slide. This is funny because someone, like I'm on all these like internet things, and this came from like one of the critical psychiatry things. Look what those psychiatrists do. But it turns out they did that. This is like from some Hungarian, you know, hospital that they put this thing on, and it ended up, when I heard the whole story, it wasn't quite as draconian. It was based on this idea that if you can train people to smile, the habit of smiling, that they will feel better. And now there is this field of positive psychology that says, you know, you think, oh, if you feel better, you're going to smile more. But actually, if you develop a habit of smiling, that like it sends feedback mechanisms. I mean, this data has been challenged a little bit, but it's an interesting idea. And then you actually feel better. So I thought that was kind of funny because I'm emphasizing these positive psychology ideas, the power of social connection, and self-compassion. So, you know, if you fall off the wagon or whatever, you know, you can say, I'm not good enough. And this is the idea, is expected. It may happen. You know, do your best and forgive yourself. And, you know, I was somewhere else and you know, there was food coming around, and it wasn't a good meal for me. And like there was this big plate of pastry, and so someone sitting next to me said, "Oh, you're being good." I mean, that whole thing, and this lovely person, I'm not critical, but we've made this bad, good, moralizing kind of thing, and I just don't think that's helpful. We're doing the best we can. That's just a food I'm choosing not to eat. It's really not good for me. It doesn't help me feel good. I mean, maybe for a minute it would, but that's like one thing. I just don't really have much of a desire to have that stuff, because for me it was so associated with almost immediately after the momentary pleasure of the sweetness on my lips of feeling bad. So that's been a helpful thing to remember that. So really to try to have, you know, mantras, one day at a time. Baby steps, that's from the movie What About Bob? But I have to say, I really like that mantra. And it's embarrassing because it's not a very flattering movie about psychiatrists, but, you know, it's a very funny movie. And then I'm going to talk about mindfulness and habit formation. So I think people know a lot about mindfulness. It's become very popular and having broad use. And the basic idea was to bring your attention to the present moment. So focusing on your breath, you know, focusing on where you are, feeling your body in the moment. And it can sort of counter this like mindless automaticity to do something. I mean, there's a whole kind of mindfulness-based eating where you really try to train yourself to think about the food and to really pay attention to fullness. For me, that wouldn't be enough. I could be like really mindful and I'd still want to eat more food. But for some people, that alone may just help them to sort of take a breath, to focus on the food, like how many of us eat and multitask, to really think about the food, to really think about how your body is responding to the food, and to try to, and when you get some craving or some urge to sort of go in a different direction, to use mindfulness to sort of distance yourself from the feeling or the thought, to kind of observe it. That's all. I mean, this obviously I could, I think Dr. Arnie Kozak came and talked about mindfulness, but it's a little bit of it. And this is just, I put this in here. I'm taking this mindfulness course by Elisha, I think there should be an H in there, Goldstein. And I did give credit on his website because it's another product, which I think is interesting. But he has this thing called STOP, which is very simple. So you stop, you take a deep breath, you observe your thoughts, your feelings, body, surrounding, and proceed. So sometimes, like, I'll go into the mailroom, and sometimes there's food there, and, it's just who I am that it's here today, whatever, I want to get it. But, to use that, to take a deep breath and really kind of think where I am, what I'm doing, and then to sort of at least then maybe make a different decision, who knows. So that's a kind of very simple mindfulness practice. So I titled this Changing the World, and I haven't really talked about that. But see, I think some of the people that have influenced me, I've given other talks about open dialogue. And, one of the things that I learned, this is this like Finnish approach that works with families. And one of the things I've taken from them is they are so customer friendly. I mean, they so value how you are in every moment. And how we are in the world can impact the world. If you walk into the world, like one of the stories is when I rent a car in town, like my car is broken, I go to a local dealership, and it's all these young people, and they're like incredibly nice. I mean, and I know it's that same thought, like, oh, they were taught to be nice. Okay, that's their thing. But they're really, nice. They're very positive. By the end of it, we're buddies. We're talking about dogs, and I feel good. I leave and I really feel good. I mean, how you are with people matters. So for me, I live very much in my head, and I realize that I sometimes have a habit of, walking by people and looking through them, and that may be okay in certain terms, but I have an obligation, I believe, at work, to really be my higher self, to be a kinder person. And so one of the habits, the people I work with, you're going to call me out on this because I am a flawed human being. But so I tried to make a point, when I turn off the car at the end of the day, I need to put aside whatever awful things I've been hearing on NPR and walk through that door, and I'm there to be of service to the people that have come to us. And that means smiling and making eye contact and pulling myself out of that inner space. And I think that, with all of us, I do think I think optimism can be a mental habit. So call me naive, but I think that can be a habit. So that's how we're going to change the world together. It's hard because I'm really a very angry person. But anyway, there you go. So that's sort of the end of it. What I came in here, and we can decide how we want to use this time because we are going to end firmly at 7:30. But I gave you kind of a worksheet, so there's a couple options. I do want to stop for questions, and then we can see, because the idea was you could pick a habit and come up with a plan based on that. And I offered to be your buddy. I gave you my email. If you want to check in with someone, this is what you need to do. But you may have other people. But it's ideas like to pick a habit, make a plan, write it down. Think of a cue, think of a reward, think of a buddy. And then, I gave you some ideas for how to do that. But let me just stop and first entertain questions, and we'll see how much time we have left. Okay? That's again what I was told. A month to 6 weeks, people are different, but what I can say in like my own experience, and this is like the humility part, and like I'm still very much a part of this program, and so there's a lot of like online stuff, and what I see is like there are a lot of people. I think for a lot of people, it's an incredibly successful program, and for me, it's certainly been so far, like 2 years into this, the most successful thing, because since I've been in my mid-40s, I have sometimes dropped a fair amount of weight and almost immediately gone up. It's like a parabola. It's like sort of a quicker decline and then a slow increase. And so I knew maintenance was a vulnerability, and it is for a lot of people, because there's a really big reward when you start a program, which is that the scale's dropping. And that's a huge reward. Like, keeping it the same is like not nearly as exciting. So yeah, there's something about that patterning, but I also think, and I think Dr. Pearson's talking a lot about this, that it's always there, and so I think there's always going to be work. Like I had this like epiphany today that, the success is in accepting, is a success in being able to embrace the patterns that you're working on, rather than saying, like, I would love to be someone who never really thought about food. I once knew one person like this. She was amazing. And she, like, would eat and then, like, not think about food. In fact, she would say sometimes, like, she would go for a long period of time without eating because she forgot. Like, that's something, like, that's never going to be who I am. And, it's okay.
Do you think it's easier for a younger person to change their habits in that they haven't had that 60 years of having the habit to change that style? I don't know. So I would be making up an answer. I know that, like, since I'm like saying all these awful things about myself, like, because of my own issues, like I really struggled. I raised 2 girls and 2 young women, and so I was so worried, because I think there's particular messages to women, and our culture and the gaze that's put on. I mean, if you read the paper, you know that this is things that I thought I was maybe being sensitive about. They're all true, right? So what do you do, And then, like, knowing my own stuff, is really a struggle. But so early on, I felt like I could not, because some changes I've made incrementally. Like, I used to think that I could not. I would balloon up in weight if I did not drink diet soda. And so with the first kid, you know how, like, they always want everything you want? I gave it up. And with the second one, it's the second one. I love you, dear, if you ever watch this. But it's like, I can't do it, And then I have this kid, and we have it, like, on videotape. We're filming her eating, and I'm not even going to tell you what she's eating. She says, I want soda. It's like, oh, my God, what have I done? But you know what? I did switch her to milk. And it's funny because the older one was always a water drinker because, those sugared beverages, juices aren't that great either. And we were able to do it. And I just said no more, and we did it. But I have I don't know whether it's easier or harder. But anyway, they survived. And they have, like, way better, relationships to food than I do. It's because of, 2 of them left, another one's here. Raising them in Vermont with, like, a lot of great people around them. Just like, like to filter out their mom. Well, dilute. Other questions? Other embarrassing stories you want to hear? Well, okay, good, yeah.
So you work with people or have worked with people with serious mental health issues. So I'm wondering how or where you can apply this. And I know that mental health issues are way more complex than changing how you eat, and maybe they're not, but interested in how you can apply this kind of practice to someone who has severe depression, just because this has come up very recently in my family. My niece is having a severe depressive episode, and my sister is struggling. So I'm interested in the application for those kinds of situations.
Oh, I think this applies, and I think that again, it doesn't have to be an either or; it's a both and. But exercise can have a really ameliorative effect on mood, and what you eat. Food is medicine. We forget this. Food is medicine, and there is a lot of data. The problem is that when someone is really sunken low and they seemed robbed of their motivation, then you say, do this, it feels like you say, go to the moon, So it's a tricky thing, but I think that you nevertheless want to try to engage people the best you can. And, I'm not joking when I'd say I would like to have coaches, one-on-one coaches, preferably people with lived experience who can sort of walk with people, walk them through, go to the grocery store, cook a meal together. First of all, the social connection would be helpful, and then the patterning can get there. So I think this is relevant to everybody. It's just there definitely are people that have a harder time accessing it, but I think it is, personally, I think it's actually a mistake to say this doesn't apply to you, and it'll apply to you when this other thing happens. I think it can be everything at once. Yeah.
Thanks, Sandy. So I have this thing for smoking cigarettes, and it's a coping skill. It doesn't really mean anything more than the habitual pattern of the smoking. But it feels like something that has helped my brain chemistry a little bit, yet that's still kind of like a rationale for engaging in the habit, which my lungs are kind of rock hard. I should probably stop like tomorrow, but I guess we were talking a little bit about how patterns or habits might take a month, maybe longer to develop. But is that with or without a substance being addictive? And then over and above that, is it like serotonin that creates the pattern of habit, or a certain brain chemistry, or just having the pattern of like honoring whatever the habit might be, good or bad, as part of like your diurnal cycle? So, is that too complicated? I'm sorry.
No. It's a great question. Thank you. It's a great question. So let's see. First of all, the neurotransmitter that's most closely associated with the reward circuitry is dopamine. So dopamine seems to be this neurotransmitter that really kind of gives us vibe and sort of juices us up about life. That's sort of one of the things that it does. With tobacco, it's thought that the highly addictive substance in it is nicotine, and that nicotine in and of itself is, probably isn't that harmful, or there's not a lot of evidence it's harmful. What's harmful about tobacco is all this other stuff that the nicotine is wrapped in with. So, one approach to tobacco cessation is to do nicotine replacement. And, with opiates right now, they're so addictive and hard to come out. There's a lot of, we have a big medication-assisted treatment program where you replace it. But again, I think all of that can still be married to some of this other stuff. So understanding what the cue is, and, the reward is probably getting the nicotine, and so paying attention to the cue, the pattern, and trying to sort of substitute that in is really helpful. Now, you asked a really good question of like this time frame. I mean, I think that with substances, it is more complicated because you have to withdraw from the substance, and it may take longer. I mean, the idea with like nicotine replacement was, when it first got marketed, it was like a 4-week thing. But I know people that take a lot longer, and there may be something that if there's someone who's been struggling with a psychiatric or emotional problem, that there may be something about that seems to make these substances, particularly tobacco, more problematic because the rate of tobacco addiction seems to be higher. So I really encourage people to just go, if they can switch over to nicotine, to just go slower on the withdrawal. of it. But I still think you want to look at the environment and the cues and the patterning and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, you have a question?
Sandy.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. Yeah, it's good to see you.
Hi, good to see you. I'd like to say, well, what the government and the local government and the federal government have not understood about opiate addiction and any other addiction like tobacco addiction and anything else. The one thing that they don't understand and they can't get a hold of, I don't know if maybe they understand bits and pieces or whatnot of it, but the reason why people get addicted to drugs and things like that people get addicted to those are the people that have less money, have less education and opportunities, and people that I'm around, that I live around, I see that greatly, that what I just mentioned on a immense regular basis, and when I say it's very annoying and immensely hard to live with, that's another immense understatement. But what they don't realize is that it all stems to environment. And when people grow up in a poor environment with no opportunities and no education, of course, the people that are addicted to drugs and cigarettes are the people that have the least amount of money and the least amount of education and opportunities, and the biggest bookload of legal and criminal offenses on their tack. And this is the obvious problem, but they can't. The federal government and the local government can't get a hold of it, whether they know that's the problem or not.
So, one thing that you're hitting on that's gotten a lot of attention is this concept of adverse childhood events. So there's this correlation between being exposed to adverse events, which include poverty, abuse, there's a bunch of things. And I mean, the big finding of those studies is that those seem to correlate with things that you wouldn't expect, like thinning bones when you're older or high blood pressure. But they do also correlate with the risk of addiction. Now, addiction cuts across socioeconomic categories. However, there does seem to be some connection of early childhood trauma leaving a person more vulnerable. So, that's there. I think what we sometimes, it would be good to, and I think there's some effort to try to, do everything we can to protect children and bolster them, but we don't want to lose sight of the people who are now, adults and struggling with these things and trying to figure out ways to sort of help them to get some control. And it's hard. I mean, that's the thing. It's hard. And that's where you want the self-compassion, not to be judgmental and moralizing people who've gotten stuck in whatever the thing is that they've gotten stuck in. There's not really an easy answer, but I do think there are tools that people can use.
There's sure not an easy answer.
Yeah, no. But thank you. That was a really good comment.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, of course.
Other questions?
Oh, here's one. Oh. We'll get Deb next.
Yeah, my question is about ibogaine.
Excuse me?
My question is about ibogaine. That it's astounding how fast it can change people's addictive habits patterns. That just overnight, all of a sudden, they have no longer have any desire for the addictive drug that they were addicted to. I find it upsetting that people have to go to foreign countries to get treatment, effective treatment. I'd like to know what
I'm putting it in my to-do list to look it up because I have nothing to say. I don't know. So, but thank you. Yeah, Deb, I think there was a question up here. No? Yes? You don't have to.
Yeah, so speaking to the point the gentleman just raised there too, I think there's so much of that societal issue to deal with that could solve the problem, but if we could solve the problem. But I think the people that I've known in that situation, I mean, there's just such a sense of hopelessness, really, and why no option, so, screw it, I'm not getting anywhere. I was going to ask, though, personally, I have some habits I would like to break, too, and over the last several years, I found myself, before you want to start breaking a habit, you really have to be motivated to do it. And over the last few years, I've had trouble getting that motivation. So I didn't know if you could speak to that at any way.
Well, that's the hoopla of the talk, whatever, for what it's worth. That's what I'm saying. You're absolutely right. It's because it's hard. And so what is that thing to shift out of the sort of, system one, if you will, into that? And I'm being honest with you. I can't remember when it happened, but there was something that popped up on Facebook or whatever, and because I'm always curious, I start watching it, and it was, and I was talking to someone here that, there's a lot of people out there looking at online marketing and how to get eyeballs, and the person who did this, and she's talked about this, went to one of those programs and used that because she felt, and I believe her as a sincere person, she had been involved in the food addicts program. There's a whole thing there, and she had her own ideas. She's a cognitive scientist herself and had been studying this, had her own experience, and felt that was a little too rigid and sort of tweaked it. And she felt she had a mission. She felt she was going to help people, but she went and got this training, and the training was the hook. Because if you say to people, oh, this is what you do, you're going to eat 3 meals a day, no sugar, no fat, and you're going to weigh and measure all your food, and you're not going to eat between meals. When people ask me, what do you do, and I say that, it's they walk away. And so the hook is the neuroscience. The hook is the self-compassion. The hook is to say to do it because you do need that hook. And it's an interesting thing, but that's absolutely true, and so, yeah, Question. Maybe, well, we'll see if there's more. We probably have time for one or two more, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah, of course.
Hi. I've been trying to lose weight for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm almost 230, and I'm 5'7".
Yeah.
And I find that I can't do it by myself.
Yeah.
Sugars, ice cream, everything. What can I do that would get me started on the path to, what's the hook?
So, the one thing is a lot of what I've talked about, I think that UVM does have some programs, but one of our wellness gurus, I see him up there, we've been talking about offering a group for clients, people, and sort of walking through some of this together. So it's something that I'm interested in doing, and I just needed to find the space and time to do it. But so keep your ears out, and maybe we can do something together. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You need a partner. You need support.
Yeah, I can't do it. I just can't do it by myself.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And nor can I.
Okay.
Nor can I. So
right.
we're, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. My husband and I have a 21-year-old daughter, and I'm curious, do habits form in the same way for children as they do in adults, or is there a difference as the brain develops?
Yeah, I don't feel like I know that enough to want to answer it, especially when the camera's going, maybe. Honestly, it's a great question, but it's not really my area of expertise. I do think kids develop habits. 20 months in, you've probably seen it, sleeping behaviors. Excuse me?
Oh, okay.
It was, do children develop habits in the same way? And so, here I'm speaking from, having raised kids. Sleeping, you want to get your kid to sleep through the night, and all the different programs that are building a habit. Do you pick them up? Do you not? So, I think they do, but I don't feel like I'm expertise enough to really want to give you an answer. I wouldn't be right. Okay.
Hi. What's the science behind writing it down every day?
It's the commitment. It's the you're making it. We're talking about level, like getting the energy. Getting like the mental energy, because initially this is going to be work, right? And writing down seems to help people get that energy. It's making a commitment. It's making it. There's really a lot of work, certainly around eating, that writing down what you're eating. It also makes it more mindful. So if you sort of have an idea like, oh, this is what I'm eating, but, for a lot of us snackers, it's like somehow, if it's like eating it out of the box, it's like not actual food. It's like, really, we all have a lot of this stuff that we're doing. And so it's partly kind of the mindfulness, making one aware, making that commitment. It's all bolstering that kind of energy that you need. I don't know if that's like a sciencey enough energy, but that's what it seems to be doing. I highly recommend the writing it down. I think that's a very powerful tool. Excuse me?
It can be just a sentence a day?
Well, it's according to what your thing is. So if you say, like for me, like I gave an example, like I want to be smiling when I walk through the door, and up until I need to talk to our attorney that day, but I always smile. I always smile then. But I want to be smiling. So what I said as a plan is like I have a habit of I have my keys on a lanyard because otherwise I would lock myself out of everywhere, and I keep them in the drink cup of my car. And so the way to do this would be to write down, remember to smile on those keys, because the last thing I want to do when I get out of my car, right, that's the routine, is to look at that. So I look at that and it's there, and then I walk through the door and I have the prompt, and then the reward is really like, I know I'm going to feel better about myself if I'm able to live up to that standard that I've set, but it's that commitment, storing up your effortfulness. And you can play around. I've thrown out some different ideas and can sort of play around and see what seems to work for you. But I think writing down and making a commitment, I think, is one of the things that seems to be pretty compelling. Yep. Okay. Well, thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Steingard. Thank you all for coming. If you could put your feedback forms in the water box, we'd be grateful. And we'll see you in the spring.